Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan saying extremist forces have hijacked the Indian government. Speaking at the Torkham border crossing with Afghanistan, Khan ruled out talks with India until it restores occupied Kashmir's special status. Prime Minister Khan said he will fight Kashmir's case in the United Nations General Assembly. Khan also informed his Swedish counterpart Stefan Löfven about India's illegal actions in occupied Kashmir. The Prime Minister also said peace in Afghanistan will benefit Pakistan the most. He went on to say that Islamabad will try its best to revive the Afghan peace process. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says India is an irresponsible nuclear state that poses a grave risk to international peace. Addressing a Kashmir conference in Islamabad, he said Pakistan will respond befittingly to any Indian aggression. Azad Kashmir's President Sardar Masood Khan urged the world to save Kashmiris from genocide, torture and ethnic cleansing. He said the continuous lockdown has resulted in severe food and medicine shortages in the occupied valley. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan will always stand by the Kashmiris. He added that the world has rejected India's narrative of painting occupied Kashmir's indigenous freedom movement as terrorism. Islamabad rejects an Indian request for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to use Pakistani airspace for his flight to Germany. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the decision was taken in view of India's continuing oppression in occupied Kashmir. He said Pakistan has conveyed the decision to the Indian High Commission in Islamabad. Earlier this month, Pakistan refused to allow its airspace to the Indian president for a flight to Iceland. The European Parliament has called the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir alarming and unacceptable. Meeting in Strasbourg, the Parliament criticised India for denying Kashmiris their right to self-determination under UN resolutions. European lawmakers asked India to end its lockdown of occupied Kashmir. It said New Delhi must be held accountable for the murder of Kashmiris by the Indian Army. European Commission Vice President Federica Mogherini said the situation in occupied Kashmir is unacceptable. MEP Klaus Buchner said the UN must intervene and send a peace mission to evaluate the situation. EU Minister Titi Chuprapan said the Union will continue to closely monitor the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir. Well, the Indian government says it will keep detained politicians from occupied Kashmir behind bars for up to 18 months. The Minister of State for the Prime Minister's office, Jitendra Singh, is the first government official to put a timeline on the detentions. Leaders of Kashmir's freedom struggle, other local politicians were arrested after the abrogation of Kashmir's special status on the 5th of August. Meanwhile, Turkish MP Hakan Çavuşoğlu urged India to immediately halt its human rights violations in Kashmir. The Turkish Parliament's Human Rights Commission says Kashmir has become one of the most sensitive regions in the world. Saudi Arabia accuses Iran of sponsoring last week's attacks on its oil plants. Defense Ministry spokesman Turki al-Malki says Iranian drones and cruise missiles were used in the assault. He said initial investigations suggest attacks could not have been launched from Yemen. Maliki said the coalition has the ability to confront the attacks and defend vital oil facilities. He said the results of the probe will be made public soon. US President Donald Trump orders more sanctions on Iran. The White House has not revealed the details of the new sanctions so far. Tensions in the Middle East increased following the Houthi drone attacks on 2 oil plants in Saudi Arabia. Washington accused Iran of involvement in the attacks, which cut the kingdom's oil production by half. In its first response after the attacks, the US increased curbs on Tehran. But Iran's President Hassan Rouhani accused the US of escalating tensions in the region. He says Iran-aligned Houthis attacked Saudi oil facilities as a warning.
They, Houthis in Yemen, did not hit hospitals. That so upset you. They did not hit schools. They did not hit a market in Sana'a. They hit an industrial zone to warn you. Learn from this warning. Consider putting an end to war in the region.
Rouhani also said the US must lift sanctions on Iran if it wants to resume dialogue.
Negotiations under maximum pressure is impossible. If your claims are right and if you are after negotiation, all pressure should be lifted.
Saudi Arabia has promised to deal with the Houthis' threat with power. US President Donald Trump also hinted at possible military action after Riyadh concluded its investigation into the attacks. Well, staying with US President Trump, and he's named Robert O'Brien as his new national security advisor. O'Brien will replace John Bolton, who was sacked by Trump last week. Robert O'Brien has been serving as the special envoy for hostage affairs at the State Department. He'll be President Trump's fourth national security advisor. He's previously served under the presidencies of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Britain and Germany have agreed to collectively respond to last weekend's airstrikes on Saudi Arabia's oil plants. In a phone call, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Angela Merkel stressed the need to work with international partners to resolve the crisis. Johnson also called Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He reiterated the UK's support for the kingdom and offered to help with its security. Now, international oil prices have dropped over 6% since Saudi Arabia said it will restore its full supply capacity by the end of this month. More in this report.
Much of Saudi Arabia's oil supply capacity has been offline since two major oil installations were damaged in airstrikes on Saturday. Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman says the kingdom has plugged the shortfall in supplies by tapping inventories.
Over the last 2 days, the damage has been contained, and more than half of the production capabilities that were damaged as a result of the attack have been recovered. The company will meet its commitment to its customers for this month by withdrawing from its reserves of crude oil and making some changes to some oils with the view that complete production capabilities are restored to 11 million barrels per day by the end of September.
The Saudi Energy Minister says the kingdom will continue to play its role as a secure supplier to the global oil markets.
Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says the US and its allies have been committing war crimes in Yemen for almost half a decade. Zarif said Washington is embarrassed because of its hundreds of billions of dollars worth of arms could not intercept Yemeni fire. In a series of tweets, he said Washington's double standards have been exposed. He said the US is in denial if it thinks that Yemeni victims of the war crimes wouldn't strike back. Yemen's Houthi rebels targeted 2 Saudi oil refineries on Saturday, cutting the kingdom's oil production by half. Well, the Taliban say their doors are still open if US President Donald Trump wants to resume peace talks. In an interview, Taliban chief negotiator Mohammad Abbas Stanekzai said negotiations are the only way for peace in Afghanistan. Stanekzai said the Taliban have done nothing wrong as claimed by the US. The chief negotiator said he hopes the US will rethink its decision and resume talks. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for 2 suicide bombings that killed 48 people in Afghanistan yesterday. Or staying in Afghanistan, and a woman and a child were among several people injured in an attack on a government building in Jalalabad. Officials say the attackers detonated explosives before storming the building. A government official from Nangarhar province says security personnel cordoned off the area after the attack. He said more casualties are feared. In Liberia, a fire at a school kills 26 children and 2 teachers near the capital city of Monrovia. A police spokesman said the students were learning the Quran when the fire broke out. He said only 4 people managed to escape the fire. Initial investigations suggest an electrical fault caused the blaze. Well, I'll be back with more news and stories from around the world after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition failed to secure a majority after Tuesday's elections. Exit polls show the coalition could not secure required 61 seats for a majority. The polls put Netanyahu's Liquid party at 31 seats, trailing Benny Gantz's Blue and White party by 2. Israeli Election Commission says the final turnout was nearly 70%. The former military chief Gantz had ruled out taking part in an administration with Netanyahu. Gantz was quick to claim victory, although many believed the results were too close to call. In Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's lawyer James Eadie tells the Supreme Court that the decision to suspend Parliament is not a matter for judges. He says the Prime Minister's decision is a political issue. Eadie said it's a matter for Parliament to hold the government to account. He added that lawmakers can hold a vote of no confidence against the government if they wish to do so. The Supreme Court is hearing petitions against the suspension of Parliament. Prime Minister Johnson suspended Parliament from the 10th of September to the 14th of October. Opponents said Johnson wants to silence the legislator ahead of Britain's exit from the EU. The European Parliament has passed a resolution to grant Britain another extension to avoid a no-deal Brexit. 544 members voted in favour of the motion, while 126 opposed it. The resolution is non-binding for the bloc and the final decision will be made at an EU summit next month. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel said Britain can still leave the European Union in an orderly manner. She said Germany is ready for a no-deal Brexit but will prefer an orderly exit with a deal. Britain is scheduled to leave the EU on the 31st of October. Venezuela's government and 5 opposition party leaders have agreed to start a new dialogue process. Main opposition leader Juan Guaido was not part of the new deal. President Nicolas Maduro said his government has opened all doors for dialogue and for political stability. Hours later, the government released Guaido's close aide, Edgar Zambrano. Meanwhile, the US and its allies have invoked the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance. The US State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said the action was taken to confront the threat posed by President Maduro. Spain will head to the polls for the 4th time in as many years on the 10th of November. Acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced fresh elections after failing to form a coalition government. In April's polls, Sanchez's Socialist Party won the most seats but fell short of a parliamentary majority. He called for elections after King Felipe failed to build a consensus between rival party leaders. At a press conference, Sanchez blamed the opposition for the political deadlock. But the right-wing People's Party and Ciudadanos Party says Sanchez is responsible. Conservative politicians in South Korea have shaved their heads in protest against newly appointed Justice Minister Cho Kuk. The minister, along with his family, is surrounded by academic and financial corruption allegations. Conservative Liberty Korea Party leader Hwang Kwai-an got his hair shaved off outside the presidential palace. Protesters want the new minister Cho to resign. Last week, 2 female MPs shaved their heads over the same controversy. The act is a traditional protest in South Korea. In Italy, 3 people have been killed in a powerboat crash. The super-speeding boat lost control and slammed into an artificial reef in Venice. The accident happened as the vessel was attempting to break the Monte Carlo to Venice speed record. Firefighters say they pulled 3 bodies from the sunken boat. 1 Italian and 2 British racers are among the dead, while an Italian racer survived. Now, in other news, Argentina's 2-year-long economic crisis has intensified in recent months. The country's inflation topped 55%, while 10% of the population fell below the poverty line. More in this report.
The southern oil-producing province of Chubut is a microcosm of the country's crippled economy. Chubut, with a population of nearly 600,000, produces 30% of Argentina's oil and 50% of its natural gas. But the Patagonian province is suffering the explosive cocktail of galloping inflation, a plummeting peso, and colossal debt. Public servants in the country's oil hub are no longer paid on time. The turmoil has forced even teachers and doctors to go on strike.
And now we don't know when we will get paid. We were going to get paid today, but we didn't. And apart from that, we are going to receive our salary in installments. In other words, without a raise, gradually, and in installments.
Healthcare is among the frontline public services to suffer the most. Hundreds of hospitals across the province lack basic facilities.
Hospitals are without income, without supplies, without infrastructure. The same thing happens in schools. I mean, this is a much deeper problem than it seems. It is a crisis in which the workers are the victims. We are the tangible results, but there is a deep crisis in Chubut because public policies are not going to be able to be executed properly.
The country's centre-right president, Mauricio Macri, imposed austerity measures to reduce the burden of subsidies on the budget. But Argentina's people say more substantial action is needed to stabilize the worsening economy.
Switzerland is among one of the first countries in the world to begin deploying the new 5G telecommunication system. But worries around the harmful effects of radiation from antennas have sparked a nationwide revolt. Demonstrators against the technology will be filling the streets of the capital Bern later this month.
A growing number of Swiss people are voicing alarm at the possible health risks from exposure to electromagnetic radiation from the new 5G antennae. They have threatened to put the issue to a referendum in a country famous for its system of direct democracy. This allowed the country to pull in revenues of nearly 380 million Swiss francs.
The cantons have risen, 4 or 5 cantons have voted on a moratoria they removed a few days later by the Confederation, which has sold the licenses and has said it is not your area of expertise. You cannot decide, and it's ultimately the whole Swiss political system that is challenged.
Several cantons, including Geneva, have buckled to pressure from online petitioners demanding a halt to the construction of the 5G infrastructure. Opponents are urging authorities to put a moratorium on the rollout. The Swiss Federation of Doctors is also urging caution, especially if there is no proof of any risk to health caused by the increased radiation.
Somehow we are for technology, but technology that works in harmony with life. We cannot stop the progress of technology, we cannot stop the evolution, but it is sure now that 5G is a big no. It does not work that way. When we dig a little deeper, it does not work.
A group of experts was appointed by the Swiss government last year to probe the risks involved with introducing 5G. Their findings will be published later this year.
Now, in America, New York has become the second US state to ban flavored e-cigarettes, following Michigan. This follows a surge of severe respiratory illnesses and 7 deaths linked to vaping. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo proposed the emergency ban, citing surging use among young people. The state's Public Health and Planning Council voted to adopt the prohibition. In a statement, Cuomo's office said the ban applies to all flavored e-cigarettes besides menthol. Meanwhile, the state of California has ordered a vaping public awareness campaign. Governor Gavin Newsom unveiled a $20 million budget to educate young people about its dangers. Climate activists from Extinction Rebellion held a funeral procession for London Fashion Week. Activists carried coffins and waved flags, while musicians led them towards the event's main venue. Funeral attire, dead flowers and sustainable fashion designs were paraded throughout London. Earlier, activists poured out a bleeding red carpet on the opening day. They also demonstrated outside Victoria Beckham's fashion show over the weekend. Extinction Rebellion had called on the event organisers to cancel the 5-day event. With growing environmental awareness, demonstrators call for fashion brands to go green. Well, I'll be back from stories from the world of business and sports after this break. Hello and welcome back. Now in business news, South Korea has dropped Japan from its list of countries with preferential trade status. Japan has already downgraded South Korea's status as part of an escalating diplomatic and trade row between the two neighbours. South Korea's Ministry of Trade and Energy says the regulations will apply to weapons exports and electronics products. Relations between the two countries have declined after a ruling by South Korea's Supreme Court last year. The ruling says Japanese companies should compensate South Koreans used as forced labour during World War II. Well, it's 28 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore. I'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.